Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, as I mentioned before, for taking time out of your day to join us for what I think is going to be a very important topic we're going to talk about. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We are recording this, so it will be available on our website, hopefully within the next week. Likewise, we're also streaming right now on Facebook Live. So hello to the Facebook community out there. You'll be able to see a recording on Facebook Live as well after. So if you've not visited our Facebook page before, just type in Investment Strategists at Better Banks, and we try to always post some timely content for you. Additionally, I will let you know that you are in listen-only mode and your video is off. Some housekeeping items at the bottom. If you scroll towards your taskbar, you will see the Q&A box. We are going to take some time and take some Q&A at the end. So feel free to type your question in there and we will get to it towards the end of our webinar today. Well, we're very excited at Investment Strategists to welcome Heather Olson, who represents One America. And she's going to talk to us about what is a timely topic today. And that's what happens when you've done a good job with your financial plan, income's good, and then you get some type of big event that happens and it changes your income forever. Perhaps you get some type of gap in there that's just going to make it to where what previously worked for you is no longer going to work. And today we're going to focus on what seems to be the most common one, which is what happens if you need an elongated long-term care stay of any type, whether that be some type of in-home care or whether that be what we traditionally know as nursing home care or anything in between. So I'm going to go ahead and hop off here. I'll hop back on towards the end here, and I'm going to let Heather go ahead and take it away. Heather, it's all yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Heather Olson with One America, and I represent One America's asset-based long-term care solutions. And really today, the whole purpose of this presentation is to educate you about the different options that are out there when it comes to retirement planning. This is purely for educational purposes, and we're really focused on the long-term care aspect if something should happen and you need care over an extended period of time. So we're going to get started and talk about what we refer to as the great income gap. And if you think about retirement planning for retirement, we can parallel it really to mountain climbing, where when you think about it, the climb up the mountain is really the accumulation phase, where we are working and we're accumulating our assets, saving for retirement, and we get to the top of that mountain, which is really our retirement date. And then we get down to the distribution phase or the descent down the mountain. And if you think about really some of the challenges that the baby boomer generation is facing in retirement, it's challenges that no other generation has previously dealt with. The reason being is if you think about when the baby boomers entered the workforce, you had the beginning of the demise of the defined benefit plan and really the start of the defined contribution plan. So we saw a shift in responsibility of planning for retirement go from employer to employee. And thinking about some of those challenges that every one of us is facing if we're not fortunate enough to have a pension is we have to deal with longevity risk. And that's really an actuarial measure that says 50% of us are going to live beyond life expectancy, and 50% of us are going to die prior to life expectancy. And the longer that we live, the more life expectancy comes into play and all the other challenges that we face, such as market risk, because our assets have to continue to grow over time the longer we live. We also have withdrawal risk, is how much can we safely take from our portfolios without running the risk of running out of money? And if you think about it, we've been in a low interest rate environment for quite some time. And studies have shown that prior to the tech bubble bursting in the early 2000s, people were able to take out 7 and 8% from their portfolios, and that worked. After the tech bubble burst in the early 2000s, the study showed that 4% was really the safe withdrawal rate that one can take out. And then fast forward to about 3 years ago, now they're saying 2.8% is the safe number. In addition, you've got inflation, and we fortunately have been in a low environment where inflation's been relatively low. But over time, as inflation starts to creep up, we have to make sure that our purchasing power can keep pace or outpace inflation. One of the other challenges, and this is really the biggest concern of most retirees, is healthcare costs. And there was a study that was put out by Fidelity that said the average person saving for retirement or in retirement is going to spend ballpark around $320,000 on healthcare costs in retirement. Now, that doesn't include long-term care costs. That's a completely separate issue. So we're going to take a look at what the actual cost of long-term care is across the country. And when you look at what the cost of in a private room or a private room in a facility would cost, you're looking at an average annual expense of $90,000 per year. Now, keep in mind that 9 out of 10 individuals want to stay in the comforts of their own home. Most of the claims that we see as a company start out in the home, and an individual may transition into a facility if it's no longer safe for them to be at home. But when you look at that $90,000 a year, if we were to inflate it at a rate of inflation of 3%, 10 years down the road, you're looking at a cost of over $137,000 per year and $184,000 20 years down the road. Now, we do see as a company a couple different trends that could possibly drive up the cost of care over time. And we're going to take a look at those 5 trends that we see that could potentially drive up that cost of care even further. The first trend that we see is that the baby boomers are going to need some form of care at about 10 to 15 years. So the question becomes, the demand is going to be there. Will that supply be there to meet that demand? In some areas, it certainly may, but in other areas, there may not be enough providers, and that may drive up that cost of care. The second trend that we see is the fact that we're all living longer lives. And if you think about it, the longer we live, the higher the probability of us needing care. Just over the last 100 years, our life expectancies have increased 30 years. And if you think about from the time the baby boomers were born, their life expectancies increased 13 years. So the longer we live, the higher the probability of us needing some form of care at one point in our lives or another. The third is family dynamics. And I like to use my family as the prime example for this, is we have a tendency to move for opportunity. So we don't necessarily stay in the same place that we grew up. We may have a family that's scattered throughout the country. So my family is the prime example. My husband, my children, and I are in Chicago. I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania. So for any of you that have watched The Office, Scranton, right outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania. My mom and my sister are still in Pennsylvania. My father's in Florida. My mother-in-law is in Kentucky. My father-in-law and his wife are in Vermont, and my sister-in-law and brother-in-law are in Florida. So if you think about if mom or dad needed any kind of help, if a family member needed any assistance, we can't drive down the road and help out mom or dad. So now we're relying on others to possibly provide that care, which again is going to drive up that demand for others to provide the care. The fourth trend that we see is government programs. So looking at government programs, Medicare and Medicaid, they are not viable options for long-term care. And a lot of times when I do sessions such as this in a room, I find that some people are surprised or they think that Medicare is going to cover long-term care. And Medicare will cover skilled care or rehabilitative care if and only if there's a triggering event. That triggering event is a 3-day hospital stay. So if there's a 3-day hospital stay and the doctor feels as though the patient will get better through skilled care or rehabilitative care, Medicare will pay for the first 20 days of approved charges. From day 21 to day 100, there is a $167.50 copay that is the responsibility of the patient. After the 100th day, all financial responsibility is on the shoulders of the patient. If at any time the doctors feel as though the patient has plateaued, in other words, they're not going to get better, they will be released from care and all financial responsibility is on the shoulders of the patient. Now, Medicaid, I don't pretend to be an expert, and it does vary by state, but there's a spend down of assets. It is means tested, and that spend down depends on whether it's a single individual needing long-term care, whether it's a couple where both need long-term care, or whether it's a couple where one spouse needs long-term care, and there's certain limitations as far as what that community spouse, the spouse that doesn't need care, may keep. So Medicare and Medicaid are not viable options when it comes to long-term care planning. Now, the fourth trend that we see is Alzheimer's. And right now, in this country, every 66 seconds, somebody is diagnosed with a disease. There's currently over 5.5 million people that have been diagnosed with this illness. If there's no cure found by mid-century, we're looking at one person diagnosed every 33 seconds in this country. So thinking about the impact that can have, a lot of times I will get asked what the actual length of care is for an individual when it comes to long-term care planning. So thinking about it, when there's a non-cognitive issue, for men, the average length of care is 2.2 years. For women, it's 3.7 years. So if we were to look at those numbers of the $90,000 inflated at a rate of inflation of 3%, 20 years down the road, you're looking at, for a male with a 2.2 year length of care, of a little over $406,000. For a female, it's about $682,000. Now, the average length of care once there's a cognitive impairment such as Alzheimer's, you're looking at the average care length go up to about 8 years. So what you can see is once there's a cognitive impairment, that can have a detrimental impact on one's portfolio. So thinking about, who's going to need care? Well, statistically, according to the Long-Term Care Clearinghouse and the Department of Health and Human Services, 70% of individuals over the age of 65 are going to need some form of care at one point in their lives or another. Now, I know a lot of you may be thinking that it's not going to happen to you because as human beings, we cannot see negative visions of the future. We can only really psychologically see positive visions about the future. But the reality is 70% of individuals over the age of 65 are going to need some form of care at one point in their lives or another. Of that 70%, 20% are going to need care for 5 years or more. So the question becomes how do we protect against that? And when you think about long-term care, I don't want you to think about nursing homes or emotional conversations or statistics. I want you to think of long-term care as really just another expense that you may or may not incur in your retirement years. Now, insurance is really the cash flow that's created or a vehicle that could create the cash flow to help cover that expense if it comes into play. But long-term care is just another retirement expense that one may or may not incur in their retirement years. So one of the questions that we typically will ask is, in your retirement years, what could potentially cause your income needs to suddenly skyrocket? So let's just say, for example, that a couple is living off of $100,000 per year, and all of a sudden they need an additional 50 to 70% more income in order to live through retirement. What could cause that to happen? Most people are going to say that it's going to be the catastrophic medical or the long-term care event. When you think of that, that's really the income gap in the overall plan. So what we want to do is we want to look at the concept of the great income gap and backfill that expense if it ever comes into play. So what you'll see on your screen is a chart that shows a 65-year-old couple living off of that $100,000 per year. You'll see that the orange line, that's their income, all of a sudden at age 70 and 75, slightly increasing. And that might be because there's some health issues, which is built into the plan and the plan can cover it. It's when there's a diagnosis of Alzheimer's at age 80 where we see that income need all of a sudden dramatically increase because of the need for care until the end of life. So what we really want to do is we want to backfill and help cover that gap in the strategy and alleviate some of the pressure off of the portfolio if ever a care event comes into play. So when you think about it, a lot of times in my travels or in virtual meetings now, people will say, well, I have plenty of assets. I can cover that cost of care. I have $1 million or $2 million or whatever that number is, we can cover it. And typically, long-term care is not an asset issue, it's an income issue. What do I mean by that? When the need to pull out additional income, if that expense comes into play, what is that going to do to the overall financial plan? In addition, when that additional money is being pulled out, what are the markets doing? Are the markets up or are the markets down? If the markets are up, great. If they're down, then we have to sell those assets and realize those losses. In addition, what are the tax implications by pulling additional dollars out? A lot of times, people have the bulk of their wealth in qualified plans, IRAs and 401ks, on money that's never been taxed before. So if they have to pull that money out from their IRAs and 401ks, they have to actually pull out more to net the number needed to help offset that additional income need. So then the question becomes, what is that going to do to their overall taxes? Is it going to bump them up into a higher tax bracket, and now they're paying more in taxes? And also, how is that going to impact future Medicare premiums? Because if they get bumped up into a higher income threshold, then their future Medicare premiums going forward are going to be higher. So a lot of times the decision to self-fund is often made without consideration of how is that going to impact taxes and other pieces of the portfolio. So what are our options when it comes to long-term care planning? Well, the first option is the decision to self-fund. And if care is never needed, then no harm, no foul. But if care is needed, then we have to see how is that going to impact other pieces of the plan. The second option is to buy a traditional long-term care policy. And for those of you out there that may not be familiar, a traditional long-term care policy is a policy that will create tax-free income if care is ever needed, either in the home or in a facility. So an individual will purchase a policy and pay premiums into that policy. If care is needed, the cash flow will be turned on from that policy and help offset either in-home care or facility care. If care is not needed, then those premiums are not recovered by any beneficiaries. One of the downsides of the traditional long-term care policies is those premiums are not guaranteed, meaning that they could increase over time from the time that the policy is purchased. And also it is a use it or lose it proposition. Now, the third option when it comes to planning for an extended care event would be what we refer to as maybe a hybrid policy that maybe some of you have heard of, or an asset-based policy. So what that is essentially it's either a life insurance policy or it's an annuity policy with a long-term care rider that would cover either in-home care or facility care if needed. But if it's not needed, a death benefit would pass to who's ever listed as the beneficiary on the policy. So what you'll see on your screen is an overall portfolio with a mix of assets. The whole concept of asset-based long-term care or hybrid long-term care policies is we're going to carve off either income from the portfolio, maybe income while an individual is still working, or we're going to carve off assets from the portfolio that maybe have already been earmarked for the catastrophic medical or a care event. And we're going to reposition it into an asset-based policy. I'm going to stick with the example of a life insurance policy. So we're going to put it into a life insurance policy that can cover either an individual or a couple. And it's going to provide leverage through a death benefit based on the age of the individual or individuals on that policy, as well as their health. So the younger they are, the more leverage they get. The healthier they are, the more leverage they get. So if care is never needed, the death benefit is going to pass tax-free to who's ever listed as the beneficiary once the last person on that policy passes. However, if care is needed either in the home or in a facility, the insurance company is going to turn on that death benefit, or what we refer to as accelerate that death benefit, and the insurance company is going to pay that out on a monthly basis, and that's not going to count as taxable income for income tax purposes or for Medicare purposes. And that's going to help offset the cost of in-home care or facility care. So we're creating tax-free cash flow. If the death benefit is exhausted because of the length of care, an optional rider is going to kick in and continue to pay, in this example, for a lifetime. So if somebody has a care event that's 6 years or 8 years or 10 years, it's going to continue to pay that cash flow to help offset the cost of care. So by slicing off that little piece of the portfolio or income from the portfolio, we're essentially protecting the rest of that portfolio from a care event. So now the focus can be on growing the remainder of that portfolio, generating the income that's needed, and keeping it directed towards the household, maybe not disrupting the lifestyle of the spouse who doesn't need care. And now that spouse can manage the care instead of provide the care. And also it helps make sure that the legacy desires are fulfilled. So we're going to take a look at how these actual policies work. Every asset-based policy has two pieces. The first piece of every policy is what we refer to as the base policy. And that's either going to be on a life insurance chassis or an annuity chassis. And that's where the cash value is. That's where the death benefit is if somebody should pass never needing care. Now, the policy can be funded many different ways. That's the beauty of these policies, is the flexibility in the funding that can be tailored to each individual situation. So we can fund that policy using a lump sum. We can pay annual, we can have it pay an individual pay annual premiums to age 95, or for a limited duration of time for 5 years, for 10 years, or for 20 years. We can take cash value in existing life insurance policies where maybe the death benefit is no longer needed, but long-term care is a concern. And we can do what's called a tax-free 1035 exchange. So it would go from one carrier to another, not create a taxable event. And now we can use that cash value to purchase a policy. We also have the ability to take IRA dollars and use it to fund a policy, or we can take annuities where money is put in on an after-tax basis and use it to fund a policy. So the base policy is where the cash value is and the death benefit is, and that's the money we're going to spend first if somebody needs care. The second piece of every policy is the optional rider, which we refer to as the continuation of benefits rider. That's just an extension of benefits that can be either for a limited duration of time or for lifetime in this example. And what happens is if somebody goes on claim, the company will spend down the money in the base policy first, and then they will get into the rider and continue to pay those claims for either in-home care or facility care. So we're going to take a look at really two different examples. We're going to take a look at one life insurance example, and then we're going to take a look at one annuity example. And the whole purpose of this is just to show you how these policies would work, but understand that this may not reflect your individual situation. So the best thing to do is to have a meeting with your financial advisor, Brad, in this case, and see how this can fit, because there are different funding options that are available. So we're going to take a look at a couple age 60 where they've done a great job saving for retirement. They've got their plan set, except for the fact that they're concerned about a care event in their situation where they've seen within their own family a Parkinson's diagnosis or an Alzheimer's diagnosis. So they understand the impact that a care event can have on their overall plan. So they have money that's sitting in a CD or money that's in a money market, and they're going to reposition it and use it to purchase a life insurance policy. So we're going to look at taking $165,293, and we're going to put it into the life insurance policy that's going to cover both the husband and the wife in this situation. Now, we split those premiums between how much goes to the base policy, which buys us our death benefit, and how much goes to buy those lifetime long-term care benefits. So what you'll see is that if care is needed, they would each have $75,000 per year tax-free to cover either in-home care or facility care. So if the husband needed care, he would have $75,000 per year tax-free. If the wife needed care at the same time as the husband, she would also have $75,000 tax-free. So the insurance company would pay out if they both happened to be on claim at the same time. The company would pay out $150,000 tax-free to help offset the cost of care. However, if they didn't need long-term care, they would have that death benefit passed to their beneficiaries on a tax-free basis if care was never needed. So what we're doing is we're just helping create tax-free cash flow if care is never needed, but if care is needed, if care is never needed, then we have that death benefit that's going to pass tax-free to who's ever listed as the beneficiary upon the second spouse's passing. Now, we're going to take a look. That was the life insurance example, and understand that there's other options where an individual can pay a recurring premium, and those premiums are guaranteed never to increase. We can fund it with IRA dollars. We can look at other options for designing and customizing a policy. The second example that we're showing is really using an annuity, which is either going to be a fixed annuity, which is just going to pay a fixed rate of interest, or we can look at an index. And we're going to look at this example at a fixed annuity, which is just going to pay a fixed interest rate. So we're looking at a female who's 63, who has recently retired and has a good pension income, but she also does not have a spouse and never had children, and she's concerned about a care event and wants to reposition some money that's in an existing annuity that she is never going to use for income purposes. So we're going to do what's called a 1035 exchange, which is a tax-free exchange where one insurance company sends money to the other insurance company. So in this example, you're looking at $150,000 going into an annuity policy that's going to pay that fixed interest rate. But in addition, it's going to give her additional leverage for long-term care of $225,000. So in total, by repositioning that $150,000 and putting it into an annuity, she now has $375,000 that she could use on a tax-free basis over a 5-year period for long-term care. So she would have $75,000 per year tax-free to use if she needed in-home care or facility care, which would equate to about $6,250 per month tax-free to help offset that cost of care. So we just looked at two examples, one using life insurance and one using an annuity. But the best thing to do is, since everybody's situation is different, is to sit down and set up an appointment virtually or perhaps in person with Brad and talk about how this may fit into your overall plan and discuss the options that are available. I want to thank you for your time, and I'm going to turn it back over to Brad to have people ask questions.
Yeah, thanks so much, Heather. I was taking some good notes during that, and I appreciate the thoroughness of all of that and setting it up with just the hard facts that are going on out there initially. I mean, the beauty of working as an independent advisor with LPL is we can partner with people such as yourself to find the solution that actually makes sense for that person. We're not jamming some individual product down there. So I thought it was very interesting of the fact that all of this stuff can be customized based upon what that person's unique situation looks like. And I did write down a couple of notes here that I want to cover and then talk through with you here. I will remind everyone though, towards the bottom of your screen, there is the Q&A box. No question's a bad question. We fully understand that this is a little bit more complex of a subject matter than some of the other things out there. So we're going to keep checking that while Heather and I are discussing some of what she talked about. So please feel free to send those our way. One thing that kind of sticks out to me as a planner, and I know I talk through this with the other partners here at Investment Strategist, is the fact that, we used to just kind of view all this as just one plan, but realistically, I mean, this is compartmentalized now. Is when you get into a retirement strategy for someone, you have a bucket of money that's meant for maybe the first couple of years, and then life inevitably changes as we age. And then there's another bucket of money that's, set for that next phase in life. But when we get to this phase that we're talking about here, it is extraordinarily difficult to save enough money while also living through all those previous years of your income plan, hoping nothing happens. Can you speak to that a little bit and just say, some of what you see a lot of other advisors doing out there in terms of the planning aspect?
Sure. With the long-term care planning, it's part of the puzzle. So a puzzle, when you're putting it together, there's different pieces that make it whole. So you have to put it together. And a lot of times, long-term care, people don't want to think about it, or they want to push it off and think about it later. And in some cases, they have financial obligations where maybe a kid is going to college or they need to wait. But in reality is you have to think about what impact, if a care event happened, would this have on the overall plan? And a lot of people have this misconception that, oh, it's going to happen to me when I'm older. I can grow my assets, but a stroke can happen at any time. An accident can happen at any time, and then you don't have the time, or something happens and you're no longer insurable for these products, and that's when a lot of individuals want it the most. So we're not necessarily, a lot of times when we're working with financial advisors, we're not covering the full cost of care, meaning that if the cost of care is $200 a day in a facility, the old traditional long-term care policies were sold of, well, the cost of care is $200 a day, so let's buy a policy with a daily benefit of $200 a day, and we'll put an inflation rider on there. And what we're really looking at is what cannot be redirected from one's portfolio to, because of other financial obligations, because a spouse needs to maintain their lifestyle. So what can't be redirected from the portfolio, because otherwise it's going to disrupt the overall plan. So we can back into solving for a monthly benefit to help cover that shortfall. So for example, I did a meeting with a gentleman, and he and his wife both had pensions. And he said, well, how much should we buy? I said, that's not that's not for me to answer. You have to go back and do your homework and sit down and find out what are your monthly bills and what obligations do you have on a monthly basis. Food, clothing, shelter, transportation, prescription drugs, that pension income has to pay for, and then how much can be redirected to pay for care. And that's how you come up with your number. So that's really, everybody's different. There's going to be some individuals that want to have the full cost of care covered, but then there's other individuals that it's a certain amount. It's not the full cost of care being covered. I hope that answers the question.
It does. And you hit on something I wrote down, is the fact that, now we almost need our asset bucket, which is unique to each individual situation, to be a Swiss Army knife. It has to be able to be stable. It has to be able to generate enough income for me, which we know in this low interest rate environment, one that is probably going to be rather prolonged by what the Fed's telling us. That in and of itself is already an issue. Couple that with the fact that we need to live through that for what could be decades. And now all of a sudden we need the rest of that to be able to cover us. So one of the things I had written down is a lot of times that's just not even possible to cover the whole thing. And as a planner, that's not necessarily a fun conversation to have with my clients, but it's a realistic one. And the conversation we're having is, if you have aspirations of perhaps leaving an inheritance or not seeing what happened to a loved one, which is where you have to just consistently see assets dripping down to the point of nothing before state agencies can start to fund anything, which, in Illinois, I know for a fact those asset limits are really low. For a single individual, you can only have $2,000 in your name with less than, I believe it's $783 of income before that's even going to kick in. I mean, give me a break. That's not even possible. So, what we're talking through with people is how do we make your assets look like a Swiss Army knife to where they're going to do this, this, and this if needed. And I think that was a great point by you. The other one that we're starting to talk with a lot of people is what I was alluding to earlier, is the fact that, interest rates were clipping up there a little bit for a while since the financial crisis in 08, 09, but now they're basically flatlined again. And to get through COVID, all of a sudden, we're looking at a low interest rate environment now that's going to be rather prolonged. And I think rather than think about rate of return and risk mitigation like we have forever, the overarching concept that we need to grasp is we need to fill holes in our plan, gaps in our plan. We need to cover goals with our assets and have our money work harder. So can you talk through just a little bit more about how you're seeing, not someone's emergency fund, because it's important to have proper cash on hand, but maybe excess cash in that example you were talking about of just, lump sum funding or over a period of a couple of years?
So we can really design a policy and tailor it to whatever somebody's situation is. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll look at maybe one or two or three different options of how do we design this policy for a specific client, whether it's an individual or a couple. And it really, like for some people, while they're still working, maybe the kids are out of the house, they're grown, they're out of college, they're self-sufficient. They may decide while they're still working, now that they have income, that they can redirect some of that income in their working years to fund a policy where they may be 55 and they design a policy to pay premiums for 10 years and they're done. So that by the time they retire, they have no more, premiums to pay. Other people, if they're employed and they have an HSA account, they can pay a part of the premiums on the policy using their HSA account. For other people, we see people that have inherited money from a parent who maybe needed care but had a policy in place, and they want to take the proceeds maybe from a life insurance policy or money that they've inherited and put it into a policy as a lump sum and just be done with it. There's other people that are, they've bought life insurance policies, permanent policies, back when they were younger, and they bought them with the intent of if something happens, we're raising a family, something happens to me, passes to the, to my wife or my husband, and now they can raise the kids without any financial concerns. Well, now a lot of people, once the kids are grown, the death benefit's no longer needed. So there's cash value built up in these policies, and they'll do a tax-free exchange and use the money from the cash value in the life insurance to purchase a policy to cover one or both individuals, depending on the circumstance.
That one's really common. We're running into that a lot now, is you don't need it for the original intent. And if you're not going to use it for that intent, it kind of becomes a dead asset. So why don't we repurpose it back into the plan, do something else? So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there. I'm currently showing no questions. I want to bring to your attention just at the bottom of the slide here. Heather, is it oneamerica.com? Is that where people can go check out some of what One America is doing there?
Yes, they can go on oneamerica.com or asset-based LTC, and that goes through the whole gamut of asset-based long-term care, both on the life insurance and the annuity chassis, as well as some generic pieces on long-term care. We've got a great piece for those that may be online that are going through a care event currently with a loved one, that it's the step-by-step guide to receiving care. So what financial documents are needed, or what things, if somebody needs to go into a facility for maybe rehabilitative care, what do they need to pack in their bag? Or if I had one advisor call me on a Saturday and say, I'm going with my wife to look at a facility for my mother-in-law, and do you have a checklist? So in the back of the book is a checklist for things to look for with the facility. But the nice thing about, I would say long-term care policies in general is it gives a person control of where they receive the care, whether they want it in their home or if they need to go into a facility. It gives them control of their situation.
For sure. I mean, that's such a big one. We've gone with a lot of clients to visit different long-term care facilities, and sometimes we have this in place, sometimes we don't. It's significantly nicer we have it in place, but I do enjoy your website to where it does have the resource center that are things that are much more comprehensive. We're going to present the solution to you as your overall portfolio, but then we have the whole other life aspect of everything as well, of what does this actually look like? Is it a good fit for me from that side of the tracks? So currently still showing no questions, so we're going to just be conscious of everyone else's time here. This is one of those topics where, like I had mentioned, as a planner, it's not necessarily the most exciting topic, but for us to be doing a comprehensive full circle job for you, it's absolutely necessary. So we will be sending out a follow-up of today's webinar. Please let us know what you thought. And if you would like to see how solutions such as this could fit in your overall portfolio, please feel free just to respond to that email. We'll make sure to get the time down where we can talk either virtually or in person at our North Peoria office. Additionally, if you're catching this after the fact, I can't guarantee anything in life, but I can pretty much promise that this is still a timely topic. So please feel free to reach out to us either on Facebook or by calling our phone number at 309-685-9595 and getting on our calendars. Thank you again so much for your time. Heather, thank you so much for taking time to present this timely topic with us today. We hope everyone else has a great rest of your week. Bye now.